Okay, Aaron, are you going to kick us off? I'll just jump in. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. T is for Take Action. We have moved quite uh, nicely through a lot of really interesting topics over the last several webinars. I'm excited to be with you. This is my last webinar with you, and so what I'll be doing is building on some of the concepts and principles and models that we've discussed in some of the previous webinars, and doing a quick refresher for those of you who weren't able to participate in those. And then talking specifically, hopefully, about some ideas about how you can begin to take action at a personal level and also at a professional and organizational levels in order to really start to have some impact on the diversity and inclusion goals that you have at your library. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that this has been a particularly sad and sorrowful week in the United States, and particularly in the state of Florida. And given that we are coming together to talk about diversity and specifically about taking action, I want to pause at the beginning of this session and just ask, are there any ideas or comments or activities that you or your library has been hosting or facilitating in order to acknowledge or try to bring some healing or facilitate some dialogue around diversity and inclusion given the events of the week? Anyone have anything? Waiting for Mary and Christine. We'll just wait for a moment. Christine says, personally, I'm just sending out peace and positive energy. Good for you. I know Mary is still typing. This has been a particularly difficult experience, especially for people who are invested, like I assume all of us on this webinar are, in trying to find solutions, looking for ways to build bridges, looking for opportunities to bring education and awareness and cross-cultural experiences that really allow a different kind of space for us to exist in, for those of us who are trying to build the kinds of communities that we aspire to live in, the kind of communities that are really flourishing, and then finding the appropriate and oftentimes multifaceted roles that libraries can play in making that happen. So to see us have to deal with something as tragic and hate-filled as what has happened over this last week has been particularly difficult. It feels like we're making a lot of strides forwards, and then something like this happens. So for those of you who might feel overwhelmed or feel like our best efforts aren't necessarily being effective, just know that this is part of the ongoing journey. I've been doing this work for my entire career now, and even though there are particularly difficult experiences that we have to go through, we are making progress, and we are shaping the kinds of communities that will allow us to eventually get to a better place. And I can see just over the trajectory of my own career doing diversity and inclusion work that we've made very, very significant strides forward. So it's up to us to create supportive communities and environments for each other, and continuing to support each other, and knowing that setbacks don't mean defeat, and that there is possibility still for us to really have an impact. Mary says, I'm an academic library. We already had an LGBT display up. It's a month time for a display, so we extended the length of the display to encourage communication and resources. Good. Very nice. Very nice. Thank you, Mary. there's a lot of opportunity for discussion. There are a lot of different issues that surfaced in this particular tragedy. So, to even think about the opportunity for the intersectionality issues to start to surface around not just sexual and gender identity, but also around religion and education and our policies and our perspectives about policies is going to be an opportunity for us. So let me jump in there, and as we roll out this session, please know that I'm very open to pausing, and responding to questions or comments that come up in the chat box. If you have comments, questions at any point, please share them. Look forward to this being as interactive as possible. Knowing that we're using kind of asynchronous interaction here. So just let me know if you ever have a comment or a question. During the last webinar that I facilitated, we talked about social justice. And this is a model of social justice that I shared with the group at the time. And what it shows is that social justice has a variety of different elements that start with self-love and knowledge, the awareness work that we often do associated with any diversity work, with any diversity journey or path, individually and organizationally. This is also, the work that we do over the course of our lives, just, really understanding our identity, our leadership capacity. So beginning with awareness of self and coming to a place where we not just are aware of ourselves, the aspects or dimensions of our identity and the perspectives that we bring to our relationships, but also really loving those things. And the word love is used purposely here. We have to be comfortable in our own skin and see ourselves as having something valuable to bring, not just to our own experience, but to the interactions that we have with other people, in order then to move on to the next element, which is respect for others, right? And then the social justice elements unfold to really start moving us towards things that are more aligned with taking action. And so I'm sharing this again as a reminder because for those of you who consider yourselves social justice advocates or allies or activists, the journey is always beginning with self-awareness, reflecting and doing that ongoing work of reflecting, understanding, getting perspective, taking the pulse. How am I feeling about what am I bringing to a situation? And then how is it that I can interact with others, not just in a respectful way, but also in a way that I'm helping to raise awareness and take some action that is helping to shape change. So as you start to get to the outer rings of the social justice diagram here, what you see is social movements and social change. And a lot of the work that we do in libraries has an opportunity to be out there in some of those outer rings, right? So Mary, the work that you're doing, the displays that you have up in your library are really about awareness raising, but there's probably and possibly some things that are happening on your campus and that the library could potentially be involved with that is a kind of a facilitator role, where you're helping to bring people together to have conversations about what it is that we want to take away from experiences that are happening in our environment, what it is that we have as far as resources that give us historical anchoring as well as possibilities for solutions in the future. And so our work is very much in those outer rings, and there's a lot of possibility for us, organizationally speaking, to have an impact and really focus on the things that we could do in those outer rings. And so that's where we'll spend a little bit of time today. But we'll do that also with the perspective that our role is often as facilitators and as allies and as people who are trying to bridge differences of opinion and trying to bring in broad perspective in order to facilitate us being able to share information in a way that can truly lend itself to creating a more diverse and inclusive environment, not just not just focusing on a specific agenda that we have and then pushing that out to people. And let me go to the next slide here and talk a little bit about how this might play itself out. So the first thing that I mentioned as far as the first element of that social justice trajectory is understanding and embracing elements of your identity. We started off in one of the earlier webinars that I facilitated, I is for Identity, talking about identity. For those of you who weren't involved in that webinar, I'm sharing this as a reminder or giving this as a backdrop that embracing the elements of your identity absolutely comes as one of the early steps associated with not just the social justice journey, but also the taking action work. So understanding your own kind of cultural proficiency level and lenses, understanding how it is that you see and interact with other people, and then harnessing the power of your story as a practitioner, as a leader, and as an ally. And when I say as a leader, I mean that all of us have the potential for being leaders in many ways, and that it is, I believe, incumbent upon us to push out leadership expectations throughout our organizations. I just got home late last night from NYU Libraries in New York, and I was spending time with people who were very new to the profession and talking about this very topic, how important it is if our organizations are really going to be able to be agile and flexible and embrace the philosophy of the learning organization, where we have broad capacity for gathering new information regularly and then integrating it into our workflows, that we're going to be able to have leadership capacity everywhere, not just in the titular roles that have traditionally been our model. And so consistent with that philosophy, all of us have the opportunity to be leaders when it comes to diversity and inclusion as well. And it's not just, it's not necessary for us to sit back and wait for somebody who has the figurehead role to guide us as far as really taking action and some of the things that we can do to have an impact in our institutions. This model is called the Intercultural Development Continuum. And I'm sharing it because for a lot of folks, they want to know, how is it that I can actually develop intercultural proficiency or cross-cultural proficiency? And this model is designed to give us a roadmap. This model comes from the work of a man named Milton Bennett, who is one of the early practitioners related to intercultural competence. He still offers a lot of research and educational experiences out of the Intercultural Institute based in Oregon. All of the people who I know who are interculturalists have interacted with him and contributed to the Intercultural Institute in Oregon. It's where the researchers and the thinkers around intercultural issues come together in order to train the practitioners. This intercultural development continuum is a model that helps us understand the different stages that an individual can go through in order to get to truly having and embracing an intercultural mindset. And there's a lot of research behind this. If you look up intercultural development inventory, IDI, you'll see that there's an assessment instrument that you can use to get a sense of your own placement on this intercultural development continuum, as well as some recommendations about how to move forward along this continuum. And what it starts with, and I just want to describe this to you because I think it's really important. If we're talking about taking action, one of the ways in which we take action, especially as we think about the need to begin with our own self-knowledge and understanding, is by committing to the ongoing work of increasing our own intercultural proficiency, which is a journey for all of us. So let me just describe this continuum. At the bottom of the continuum is something called the monocultural mindset, and then the top of the continuum, the arrow, is the intercultural mindset. And the 5 levels are denial, polarization, minimization, acceptance, and adaptation. This model has been designed and tested and researched across a whole variety of different cultures. It is not culturally biased, and it has been used by many, many, many thousands of people the world over from an inventory point of view and also as a developmental tool. So it has a lot of research and validity behind it. Denial, the very first step on the intercultural development continuum, describes people who are at the stage of their mindset, their developmental mindset, where they miss differences. They don't even see differences necessarily, and some of that may have to do with not having access to people who are quite different from themselves, from being in a somewhat sheltered or monocultural environment growing up, and even to this day, and just not really paying attention to the things that differentiate people from each other, one from another, culturally speaking. Polarization is the next stage on this continuum, and the polarization, people who are in polarization see differences, but they judge them, and they judge differences as good, bad, right, or wrong, according to their own cultural lenses. So people who are in polarization and who come from the dominant culture, whatever the dominant culture is, judges the differences associated with other cultures as less than valid according to their own cultural standards, right? So less than valid according to their own cultural standards. People who are in polarization, there is also a level of polarization, people who are in a dominant culture who judges more harshly their own cultural differences. And some of that may have to do with, for example, somebody who is a member of the U.S. dominant culture, but who has grown up in a predominantly minority cultural environment, or who has spent a lot of time overseas and who has come to identify more heavily with other cultures than with one's own culture. The point about polarization is that these folks are at this stage of the continuum. People see differences, but they judge them as good, bad, right, or wrong. The next level on this continuum is called minimization. And in minimization, people de-emphasize differences. Minimization is the great American analogy or U.S. analogy is the melting pot. Right, the melting pot analogy is the perfect example of minimization. What we're really trying to do is minimize differences. We're really trying to focus on the sameness. We're focusing on how we are all the same in order to create kind of a level, to the extent possible, kind of a level opportunity for people to see and interact across differences without paying much attention to those differences. Getting to minimization in the United States used to be an aspiration. For many, many years, we worked very hard in the United States to get to a place where minimization was kind of the cultural norm in most of our institutions. So in our academic institutions, in our corporations, we actually strove for people to get to minimization, a place where we could minimize the emphasis on differences and really create common spaces. The tricky part about that is that in minimization, we miss the opportunity to leverage those unique differences that could actually be valuable. And we lose some of the opportunity for people to bring their full selves to the table. So even though minimization is something that was an aspiration at one point in time, when in the US, for example, our history was very divided and there was a lot of polarization going on, we wanted to get to minimization. We are now at a place in history where we are really saying to ourselves and really understanding that minimization is not taking full advantage of the strengths associated with some of the unique perspectives, experiences that people bring, and it doesn't allow people who come from different points of view to feel fully valued or incorporated, to feel like they're the nuances and the perspectives and the skills and the cultural identity that they bring is valued. The next level on this continuum is called acceptance. People who have an acceptance mindset deeply comprehend difference, right? People who have an acceptance mindset understand that difference exists, They see and value diversity. However, they don't always know what to do with it. They don't know what to do necessarily in a new cultural situation. They don't necessarily feel comfortable diving in to a new cultural situation. So they see it, they think it's great, they appreciate it, but integrating kind of naturally and smoothly into new cultural experiences isn't always consistent with people who are at acceptance. They're not quite there yet along some of those new cultural experiences. And then adaptation is the last marker on the developmental continuum. And adaptation is really focused on, or it's a mindset associated with, not just seeing and understanding and acknowledging differences, but also feeling comfortable and confident moving in and out of different cultural experiences. Feeling that I am welcome, it is appropriate for me to be here, and I am comfortable being able to interact in a new cultural environment. This model is actually really helpful because wherever you are on the model, it's not a judgment about where you are on the model, but it gives you a sense of what are some of the things that I might start to incorporate into my behaviors, and maybe even create a developmental plan around that would allow me to move to the next level of intercultural proficiency according to the dimensions of this model. The last little piece over here in the lower right-hand corner is called cultural disengagement. And what that is people who feel culturally disengaged from their primary cultural group or community. People who have felt expelled from their cultural community or have felt disenfranchised from their primary cultural community for one purpose, one reason or another. Let me just pause here and ask, has anybody seen or worked with this intercultural development continuum, or do you have any questions or comments about it? Anything at all about this model? It is one of the most popular and well-validated intercultural development models in use. And so I would love to hear if any of you are using it already in your institutions. Never worked with it, but makes sense. Okay, nice. And the good thing about having a model like this is that it gives us a path, right? A lot of times people are like, yeah, I get this diversity thing is good, but I don't know what to do with it. I'm not sure, behaviorally speaking, what it is that I'm supposed to be doing differently or more of. So the good thing about this is that it gives you a bit of a roadmap about how it is that you can invest in your own taking action, at your own personal level, and then putting into your life experiences some new things that will help you really move along this developmental continuum and know how how that is having an impact on the effectiveness, on your effectiveness when working with other people. So Christine says, curious as to who determines the primary cultural community or how. The model does. So you do, and the model does. So you answer in the instrument, Christine. If you were to take the instrument, you'll answer a series of questions that helps you kind of frame your identity from a cultural point of view. And the model also has and the instrument also has a lot of different kind of cultural context built into it, so that you are really setting the stage for your primary cultural community, but you also get feedback from the model about the level of engagement associated with that primary cultural community. Good. Okay. So I encourage you, for any of you who say to yourself, I'd really like to find ways at a personal level to do some of my own work, to take some action at my own personal level, to investigate this. I am a certified administrator of this instrument, but I'm sure that you probably have other folks in the state of Florida or on your various campuses who are certified administrators of this instrument. It's called the IDI, Intercultural Development Inventory. And if you ever want to use it, you can just have a certified administrator help you get access to it and then walk you through the debrief, because the debrief will walk you through exactly kind of where you are and some developmental opportunities that could be useful to you at an individual take action level. Has anybody read this book? I'm going to shift us forward to a couple of other things that I think are really important as we think about taking action. Has anybody read this book, The Righteous Mind? I actually cut and pasted a picture of it, but the whole picture didn't show on my slide. Has anybody read this? Haven't read it. Nope. Okay. So let me tell you, this book is a particularly useful in our contemporary environment and climate related to diversity and inclusion. The Righteous Mind is written by a moral psychologist. His name is Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, and I cut and pasted the image. It didn't show up. I apologize about that. I'm going to spell it for you. H-A-I-D-T, Jonathan Haidt. He's a moral psychologist, and he's done a tremendous amount of work around understanding why it is, using moral psychology, why it is that we are so divided when it comes to particularly important topics like religion and politics. This is, I think, for any of you who are on social media, I think you know that we are at a pretty significant point of divide. And I think even some of the things that have happened, like even the shooting that happened this week in Orlando, is a kind of a representation of some of the significant divide that we have and the very, very, very strong feelings that we have around issues. And as a person who talks a lot about social justice, this book has been so helpful for me because what it helped me understand is that different people come from a morally righteous place to our conclusions about not just religion and politics, but about diversity and equity and fairness and the things and social justice and the language that I sometimes use or that we sometimes use as we are out there trying to be facilitators or trying to be advocates or allies, oftentimes marginalizes people who could potentially be allies. And what Jonathan Haidt did is he worked over the course of many years in a variety of different institutional settings and academic and research-based projects and worked with cultural anthropologists, worked with different psychologists from different fields. And what he found was that there are moral foundations that anchor all of us, and that there are 6 moral foundations that I'm going to describe quickly, and that different people broken up by our kind of political affiliations anchor differently to these moral foundations. So the moral foundations are care and harm, fairness and cheating, loyalty and betrayal, authority and subversion, sanctity and degradation, and then liberty and oppression. And those 6 moral foundations are differently viewed or more heavily valued by different people coming from different political affiliations. By the way, he has a website where he gathers information. It's called yourmorals.org. I'm typing it in, yourmorals.org, where you can actually go in and fill out a survey and get some sense of your own kind of moral classification and heavy preferences, and then see how that maps out when we start thinking about politics, religion, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I know we're not talking about politics and religion, but what we are talking about in diversity and inclusion is a topic that has often been quite marginalizing, where people are very quick to kind of have an agenda or feel like an agenda is being put upon them from a particular point of view that is oftentimes considered righteous. And so as we are thinking about how it is that we might take action as allies, as advocates, as facilitators of this work, and of creating spaces where different people coming from different mindsets, coming from different places along the intercultural development continuum, as we're trying to facilitate people coming together to talk about our aspirational future together, some of the things that we might do is think about our own language, right? Think about how it is that we might be triggering people to have a defensive reaction when we start talking about, a heavy emphasis on certain things that might really rub different people differently. So I know that we're not in the business of talking about politics and religion necessarily, but we absolutely are facilitators of conversations. Yes, it is on an e-audiobook, and I have it on my iPad. I keep referring to it over and over. Thank you so much, Hugo. So I just want to share this with you because my belief, and I think many of you as librarians or people who work in libraries also see yourselves in the business of being facilitators, right? And that it's not necessarily about us proselytizing or convincing people, but instead creating safe spaces where different people can come from different points of view and feel like the library is helping to create not just an educational backdrop, but also the opportunity for information to be shared, for perspectives to be shared, for beliefs to maybe be challenged or explored differently without anybody feeling like they're being attacked or marginalized. And this book for me has been really helpful in opening up my own mind about how my language could help me to be a bit more of an ally and a bit more useful and a bit more constructive and tactful as an ally. So I strongly encourage that as background reading for anyone who's interested in thinking about being a facilitator or designing programs in your organization. Any comments, questions about that? Anything at all? I love to share readings because it's really helpful to have something that we can take away from this. And it also is something that you can share with other people and maybe have a conversation in your organization about it. Because a lot of times, and I work in libraries, I think a lot of times we come from very strong liberal kinds of perspectives. That's not always the case, but a lot of times in libraries, we come from kind of similar sorts of backgrounds, and those overtones and undertones are shining through as we do programming and as we select our facilitators and as we approach topics that could be potentially marginalizing. And so really thinking about how we can include the variety of different perspectives is going to be a huge opportunity for us. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears for a little bit and just talk a little bit about unconscious bias and a little bit about, some particular things that we could do to take action. So again, I'm still at some of the personal levels associated with taking action, and I encourage you to also start thinking about how some of this could be even programmatic sorts of things that you can do in your institutions. This is a slide that I love. That just reminds me that even if we are talking about being interculturally competent and proficient, even if we're doing all of the associated work with exploring other cultures and having kind of the intellectual experience of other cultures and of being culturally competent, that our affect is incredibly important, and that affect really matters across cultures, right? So this is something that is just kind of an overlay to all of this. And it comes from the work of Amy Cuddy, who's done a tremendous amount of very interesting work about emotions and behaviors and effectiveness. But what she found was that warmth and competence are two critical variables that account for about 80% of our overall evaluations of people and shape our emotions and behaviors towards them. So part of this is, as we're talking about taking action, as we're talking about, the need and the importance of language and doing our own work, we also have to remember that just simple emotional intelligence is important to have as another layer of the work that we're on an ongoing basis doing. In our organizations, there is a tremendous amount of work that's happening right now in libraries that's very, very exciting, to me at least, around de-biasing our environments. Not to say that we were ever particularly biased, but I have been working with a number of different libraries and library organizations, like associations, that have had a renewed focus on our systems and our structures and our processes, and how it is that we really de-bias our environment at the institutional levels. So I want to share some of that with you. Are any of you, first of all, any of you at your organizational levels really looking at some of the way, like unconscious bias or institutional sorts of things that you can change to create a more de-biasing or de-biased environment? Anyone? Some of the things that are happening in my experience are one of the things that's happening, that I just want to mention this because sometimes it's good to know some of the models that are out there. At the Association of Research Libraries, which is a not-for-profit association representing the largest 125 academic and research libraries in North America, the leaders, the members of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, are all going through the intercultural development inventory. So they're all taking the inventory, the assessment, to establish where they are along that intercultural development continuum. And then they're having one-on-one debrief sessions in order to get some feedback about not just where they are and how they came to be where they are, but also what are some of the impacts of their current mindset, and then talk about developmental goals. The thing that's really important about this is that these are all directors of libraries. Every single person that's going through this is a director of a library, and their goal is to not just expand it so that every member of the association, all of the other library directors, have this opportunity to do their own work. I mean, how many times have I heard that, right? And you probably hear that too. Of course, we're doing our work, but we need our leaders to be doing their work. We need our leaders to be the spokespeople. We need our leaders to be able to feel comfortable being the cultural ambassadors that we espouse ourselves to be. So they're actually walking the walk, which is very exciting. Another activity that I'm involved with is at the MIT libraries, where they're doing a lot of focused work looking at all of their systems and processes, where they're thinking about how they can, how bias might present itself in subtle ways, but in institutional sorts of ways. So for example, there's selection and recruitment committees. They're looking at how they're posting and where they're posting job descriptions. All of the managers are going through not just the kind of diversity and inclusion workshops, but also very specific retreats where they're talking about how it is that they are doing coaching, how they're doing performance reviews, how the values around diversity and inclusion are expected to show themselves behaviorally in every part of the library, regardless of what a person's job title is. How is it that you are coaching, mentoring, and supporting people in demonstrating behaviorally our value of diversity and inclusion? So it's another example of a place that's taking action. And it's not just we're coming and we're having a workshop and we're doing awareness. This is really about moving from awareness to institutionally, what are some of the systems, structures, practices, behaviors that we can start to take action around that are going to create and sustain the kind of culture that we want around inclusivity and leveraging the diversity that we have available to us. So it's a really exciting time. Those are just two examples, but there are absolutely more examples than that. And it's really exciting to see that there's this new wave of energy that's come back. I've been doing diversity work in libraries for 20 plus years, and there was a lull. When I came into the professional community, there was a lot of activity and I was facilitating a lot of it, but there was a good 10-year stretch where there was a bit of a lull. Not to say that nothing was being done, but it wasn't being done with the same zeal as it's being done now. And the focused attention on not just awareness, but really institutionalizing and taking action is pretty amazing. How about you? Anything happening at your institutions that you want to share with us that's really about kind of taking action at the institutional level? it's affecting your leadership capacity, or your systems or structures or processes for hiring or retaining or promoting or coaching people? Anything? We're going to hold tight just for a second. We have a couple of folks typing. Okay, Christine says I'm too new. Well, Christine, go back and check it out, ask some questions, but hopefully you'll leave with some ideas about some potential. We have a hard time finding diverse and qualified applicants, and when we do achieve them, retaining them due to lack of pay is hard. Yes, I absolutely understand that. We have a 4-hour diversity class that must be taken upon being hired. Nice, okay. And so these are all perfectly appropriate comments. For those folks who, it is not unusual that diversity in a lot of libraries starts off, and a lot of organizations starts off as recruitment and, oh, by the way, retention. Because retention and recruitment are, opposite sides of the same sword, where getting people in from diverse backgrounds and keeping them in are both difficult, and one typically balances out the other. I would say after and in addition to thinking about recruitment and retention, then the next opportunity is to really think about creating an inclusive culture. Creating a culture where people are feeling motivated and incentivized because of the workplace climate, because of the professional development experiences that they have access to, because they are being coached and mentored by people who are truly acknowledging and leveraging the diverse perspective that they're bringing in. Those are the sorts of things that I think really add to and round out recruitment and retention activities in libraries. Because as long as I've been in libraries, we've had this, and in many types of libraries and in many geographies, we have this situation where people say, we have a hard time recruiting, and then when we do recruit people from underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds, we have a hard time retaining them because they're being recruited away by other institutions. That has been the situation for a long time. And I'm not saying give up on that, but the way to round that out potentially is by thinking about how it is that you can create an organizational culture that allows people to be so motivated that they want to stay in lieu of the pay. Not to say the pay isn't important and we shouldn't deal with that. That absolutely needs to be dealt with. But also that we're thinking about what are the creative ways that we tap into people's motivation. So a person who's young, professionally speaking, might be really motivated by taking on new tasks or having access to being a project leader for a project that's going to really add valuably in a valuable way to my portfolio. Or I might be particularly motivated by being able to lead or be a part of a project team that allows me to be involved with different aspects of the community. A lot of times people from underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds say that the thing that they really find exciting about coming into librarianship is the ability to work with people from other disenfranchised communities, potentially, to be able to give back, to be able to be a community advocate and spokesperson. And so are there ways to think about helping some of these folks find ways to be motivated and incentivized to stay and incentivized to contribute at the highest level, in lieu of the fact that we often don't have the best pay? For Opal, I would say that the diversity class absolutely is a great way to introduce people to concepts that are valuable to us, and then the next opportunity for taking action at an institutional level, at an organizational level, might be to think about, now how do we build upon that, right? What do we do in 6 weeks or in 6 months that circles back to our values around diversity? How do we help people understand at the manager level and at the new hire level how our values, organizationally speaking, around diversity and inclusion should be demonstrated behaviorally, and then recognize people and reward them for those values, right? And so to take the awareness piece, which is the 4-hour diversity class, and then go to the next step, and that is how do we actually turn this awareness into managing and leveraging diversity, which is the next step along the, opportunity continuum at least. So to be thinking about some of those things, and even ways that you can either ask questions or propose things that we could do in our organizations, regardless of where you sit in the organization, you absolutely can propose things that could build upon your current infrastructure related to diversity and inclusion. And there are a lot of best practices out there in the library community that you could look around to and say, now how is it that we can start to institutionalize or build into the fabric of our culture some of the things that we espouse as our organizational values. This slide is not so much institutional, but it's also at a personal level some of the things that you might do that could also really be in the spirit of taking action. This is something that's really useful as you think about your own role and some of the things that you could do personally. You could be exposed to disconfirming data, right? So if you're thinking about yourself along that intercultural development continuum, for example, and you see yourself as a person who is at polarization or at minimization or wherever it is, how is it that you can continue to expose yourself to data that disconfirms previously held beliefs that you had around a specific group or individual or community? Now, I know a lot of us want to, we care about not being stereotypical or judgmental, but we are also people who have had a lot of data, and mental models that have built up over time. So sometimes it really is useful to say, you know what, do I have a judgment here? Am I coming too quickly to an assessment of this individual or this group? Am I having an immediate reaction through these lenses that I've been carrying around my entire life that I might want to challenge as part of my own developmental journey? The second here is interact with others of equal status. Sometimes what we do is we invite people, and I think organizationally speaking, right? Sometimes what we do is we invite people who might be part of an internship program, or they might be folks who are, so I'll give you an example. There are a lot of large academic research libraries that I work with that have programs for bringing in people from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups who are part of a residency program, right? So people who are right out of library school and come into a large research library and who are from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. What happens is that those folks come in, and even though the goal is to increase diverse representation in the organization, it exposes the other people to diversity. It gives those people from diverse backgrounds opportunity to work in a large environment. However, the status differential means that those folks are being treated like interns. They're being treated like students. They're being treated as if they have less to share, as if their ideas aren't as valued, as if they don't quite know how things work around here. And it kind of perpetuates people who are coming in and wanting to bring their cultural perspectives. It perpetuates them feeling marginalized yet again because they're not seen as professionally able to contribute at the same level as the people who have been in the organization for a long time. And so one of the challenges here is to think about how it is that we are bringing people in and who we consider to have equal status as us. And I don't mean just MLS people, but what I mean is people where we are fully able to acknowledge and appreciate and value what it is that they're bringing, and doing that in a way that is institutionally recognized. That's a really important one, because sometimes in our best efforts to bring in diversity, we are actually setting up another layer of marginalization. And I'm not saying that residency programs do that, but I am saying that some people have the feeling of being brought into the organization and then being treated as if their contribution isn't valued. The third is cooperate in the pursuit of a common goal without group members. Right? So if you are a person who along that intercultural development continuum, right, sees yourself as in minimization, for example, and you have really been actively for, a long time really thinking, I just don't want to see differences. I don't want to deal with differences. I really want us to all be the same. At the end of the day, we're all the same. Push yourself to imagine or to look for opportunities to work with someone from a different group that on pursuit of a common goal. And it doesn't have to be that it's a common goal as in I'm trying to understand your culture. It just means a common goal. It could be a workplace goal where you're working on a project or a database or a customer service experience together, so that you're really getting first-person experience working across cultural differences and then learning from that and learning to appreciate it in a way, and it's really natural. The other thing that I would say as far as an action plan that you might take away from something like this is to think about how you can create that in your own library. How do you facilitate and encourage people who come from different cultural backgrounds working together in pursuit of a common goal? When you charge a project task force or put together a project team or think about a small group of people working on a display or an event, how is it that you are intentionally thinking about bringing people together from different backgrounds? And to the extent possible, think about that. It can be your classification system, right? I was just at an institution where the librarians and the classified staff felt like there was a big divide between the two. And I really encouraged them, and they hadn't done much of this, to intentionally think about building project teams or groups where people from different classifications in the library have an opportunity to work together in pursuit of a common goal in order to share knowledge and skills, and also build an understanding and appreciation across what are perceived differences. Number 4 is engage in non-superficial contact. This one comes from something like, having a multicultural day is wonderful, or having a multicultural potluck is wonderful at the end of the year. But that's not the same as really working elbow to elbow with someone, right? Where you really get a chance to see and interact with some of the cultural differences that can be beneficial for each of you to have exposure to, and that also increase not just your awareness, but also your cross-cultural competency. So the non-superficial contact is in not just seeing and speaking to people in meetings or having a multicultural potluck, but the things that are really the kind of substantive opportunities to get to know and interact across cultures. And then receive clear norms in favor of fair treatment, and send clear norms where you yourself are not just saying that, we value equity, we value fairness, we're going to build it into our systems and processes, but that where you see something happening that isn't fair or is disadvantaging a certain individual or group, that you speak up as an ally, that you speak up. It doesn't have to be that you're the boss. It doesn't have to be your meeting, but you can still speak up and say, you know what, I think that there's an opportunity to think differently about, how the fairness of how we're approaching this person or this decision, or the way that we're describing our selection criteria, for example. So these are just a few things. These come from the work of a man named Howard Ross, who has done a tremendous amount of work around unconscious bias, and is seen as one of the kind of leading speakers and facilitators around unconscious bias, and this work is really credited to him. So a couple of things that, again, from some of the Howard Ross work that goes into approaching and addressing what is unconscious or can be unconscious bias is to think about these specific action steps. And I'm sharing these here because we're in the Take Action segment about very specific things that we can say or do that gives us, kind of a framework, right? So if I am going back to the earlier slide, right, thinking about advocating fair treatment, then in a situation where I'm in a meeting or in a selection committee or in an experience where something doesn't feel fair, or I feel like there's something that has some biased undertones, then I can point it out. And some of the phrases that I can use are I see or I hear, It appears, right? I notice, I am aware that, starting with this is my own interpretation, this is what it is that I'm seeing. It's opening up the opportunity for inquiry, but it's also initiating a conversation where you're putting the other people or person in a position where he or she has to be accountable for her or his actions or language. This is not confrontational. This is not about being confrontational. This is not about being the diversity police, but it is about finding tactful ways of taking action to interrupt what could be a really difficult and bias-filled situation for another person or as part of our processes. So some tactful language. Check it out, right? Where you imagine or wonder, this is again where you question, where you ask some questions, or where you suggest a point of view that gets the other person or the other group into thinking more empathetically. You know, what is it that's happening here? And I imagine that there may be a different approach, for example. And then work it out. Are there some suggestions that you could lead people to? And it doesn't mean that you're being dictatorial or autocratic, but it again is engaging people in a solution that is more just and fair, that all of us then can agree to and come to. And you, again, in doing all of these three things, right, are facilitating. You're not telling people, do this, that's wrong, this is right, you know, here's what we have to do. You are instead facilitating people to identify, to notice behavior that is biased, to think about possible alternatives, and then to move to solutions that are more inclusive for everyone. And to the extent that you can do this, you are, one, being an active ally, and two, you are taking the pressure off of the person who is potentially being marginalized or who is potentially the target of this bias. It's the most generous thing that you could do as an ally, absolutely. But it's also about creating inclusive environments, and sometimes it's not that we are being discriminatory in an overt way, but a lot of times these unconscious biases are just things that people don't have on their radar. Sometimes it's just, I'm not aware of it, I hadn't thought about it, I didn't mean it in that way, I was just joking, I was just being lighthearted. And so you having a tactful approach that allows a person to get to a different level of awareness and potentially to a different outcome is really a wonderful way to build a culture of accountability, a culture of inclusivity, but also a culture where people feel more comfortable knowing that you are an ally for them. Opal, tell me about your numbers. Yep. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ayuki. Oh, the scanner went crazy. No worries. And the other thing the other thing that I would love to happen here is that you don't have to be your own ally, right? So the goal here is hopefully over time, Oyuki, that we get to a place where there are a lot of people who are thinking about and able to be allies, and that you're not always having to advocate and be an ally for yourself. But absolutely, this is an opportunity for you to speak up on your own behalf without coming across as that defensive person, right? That person who's so sensitive, who we can't say anything around. I mean, that's the other part of this that's really tricky, and why it's so important for us to constantly be thinking about how we build allies is because sometimes when we speak up for each other for ourselves, on behalf of an issue that is personal to us, then people could start labeling us as too sensitive or, not lighthearted enough or not able to take a joke. So part of this is absolutely stay focused on speaking up for yourself, but do it in a way that is tactful and creates a space where other people can potentially be allies. Absolutely. Because we want to build that capacity. Everything has to be PC. Yes, absolutely. And that's the environment that, unfortunately, that's not a new environment, but yes, that comment is not unusual. And so again, this might be a bit of a template to help think about not necessarily linking it directly to PC, but linking it to empathy and different outcomes. I absolutely hope that that doesn't continue to be the situation, Oyuki. So a couple of things just in thinking about, some of your own biases that I want to mention here. And then I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because we talked a little bit, and I want to make sure that we have time to get to the action pieces. But some of the things that you can do if you have your own unconscious biases that you really want to reflect on. And one of the things that I'd say is, I think all of us have unconscious bias. All of us have unconscious bias. Our brains are designed to lead us to discriminate. It helps us make quick choices. It helps us to figure out what's dangerous versus what's safe. If to look at somebody who might be bobbing up and down in a body of water and their hand is going up and down, our brains discriminate quickly so that we can say, is this person swimming or is this person signaling for help? Our brains are designed to discriminate. So unconscious bias isn't meant to be a phrase that I'm putting upon you with judgment. It's instead an opportunity to just think about how important it is for all of us to constantly be investing in our own work and constantly be thinking about where is it that I am coming from regarding different issues and topics. And how is it that I will continue to invest in my own development? So let me give you an example that's quite personal. I started off my diversity and inclusion journey thinking about race and class. Those were the two topics that were particularly important to me at the early parts of my life when I started really trying to get my mind around diversity and inclusion. I came to it from a purely selfish point of view. I just wanted to understand my own identity, my own experiences. And so I focused on those two elements. I have more to me from a diversity point of view than those two aspects, but those were the two that seemed particularly pronounced at that point in time. One of the people who came to be my mentor, and she to this day is one of my closest friends and still a mentor, is a woman who identified herself as a lesbian to me at the time, a white woman, lesbian, and it was the first time I had ever met anyone who identified as lesbian. And from that point on, I considered myself and then an ally to the LGBTQ community and really worked hard to be an ally. I'm a straight woman, which meant that I had privilege and the ability to be an ally in a community that I was not necessarily a member of, but could absolutely have audience and maybe even influence with people who were also straight, but who were kind of on the fence or didn't necessarily know other folks who were part of the LGBT community. I could be an ally. And so I took that work very seriously and did a lot of work around being an ally to the gay community. And now, all these years later, me feeling really comfortable about that part of my identity, and I've always identified myself in a very straightforward manner as an ally to the LGBTQ community. Now I'm at the place where I realize, oh my goodness, the language is expanding and the definitions are changing and the questions are changing and the issues related to gender identity are much more complex than when I started my work as an ally to the LGBT community, right? And so I found myself really focusing a lot on understanding and asking questions and trying to wrestle with the awareness levels that I have and making sure that I'm, thinking about my own flashlight and saying, okay, wait a minute. I know that when I came into, this place in my own life where I saw myself as an ally to the LGBT community, I could use certain language like lesbian. And then, more recently, I had a young woman come out and talk to me about being queer. And I said, oh, yeah, and then at some point in the conversation, I used the word lesbian. And she said, no, I am absolutely not lesbian. I consider myself queer. And what I had to do is turn the flashlight on myself and say, whoa, wait, this is my mental model. But this is her identity. This is about her. This is her preference, her language that is important to her at this point in time. And what I need to do is, instead of say, I've been doing this work for all these years, I feel comfortable with the language my mentor says, instead really listen and learn and lean into my discomfort. And a lot of the discomfort is that there are things that I still just don't know or don't understand that are changing and that are important for me in order to feel like I continue to be an ally, to feel like I'm able to have the right language available to me. But I don't always feel that way. And that's a little intimidating, especially as a person who, purports herself as a diversity and inclusion speaker and educator. And so when I talk about turning your flashlight on yourself, I don't mean with judgment or with negativity, but think about the journey that you're on, how over time things change, not just within yourself and your own intercultural development continuum and growth, but also the environment, the context, the relationships, the political kind of scene and approaches that we have to the variety of different communities, the demographics, right? In Florida, the demographics, culturally speaking, are changing all the time. So you might have new communities of people with whom you've had very little contact or very little background, right? And so when it's time to think about stretching your comfort zone, to the second half of this slide, how is it that you are putting yourself in a position of being somewhat uncomfortable sometimes, long enough to learn? Ask questions. It is my experience, and I've said this, I think, in every single webinar and every time I talk about diversity and inclusion, it has been my experience that I say 100% of the time, if I come with honorable and transparent intentions to a person and ask a question in the spirit of genuinely wanting to learn more about another perspective or cultural background, people have been more than willing to share that with me. People don't say, you offended me, you've stepped on my toes, that's not the right language. Instead, people have been very, very willing to help me learn and to help me, process in a way that allows me to continue to grow. And so stretch your comfort zone, ask questions, read, inquire, watch movies that are different than the genre that you might typically watch or about particular kinds of diversity or cultural communities that you may not know as much about. Read different books, talk to different people, visit different places, put yourself in different environments where you're stretching yourself and also stimulating your curiosity. Those are some of the taking action sorts of things that we can do all the time on a regular basis, but also that we can challenge ourselves to do organizationally speaking, right? We can build in opportunities for people to say, hey, let's have a multicultural challenge month, leading up to our multicultural potluck that's going to happen in this month or that month. Let's challenge ourselves to all do something that is stretching our comfort zone a bit. And then at the multicultural potluck, we discuss it. We talk about what we did, why we did it, what we learned, what are the takeaways, right? And as people who are invested, as I think all of us are in this work, it's really important that we're putting ourselves in those situations regularly and also modeling for others that diversity and learning about and expanding the repertoire of things that we have experience with is not scary. It's actually joyous. So I'm going to start to wind down this session, but I want to ask you, do you have any comments, questions, anything at all? This is a good question about people's minds being changed. I have to say, one of the things that I love about the Jonathan Haidt book, The Righteous Mind, is, and thank you, Janet. One of the things that I often find, and the Jonathan Haidt book is really good, is that I think it's really tricky to try to change people's minds. I think the very best thing that we can do as facilitators is to acknowledge where people are and then share additional data and disconfirming data. So a couple of webinars ago, I shared with you a model called the ladder of inference. And I don't know if you remember this ladder of inference, but what it basically said is that all of us have access to, data. And then stepping up this ladder in our mind, which we all do in order to process information, we all select different data, right? So we could all be in the exact same room, in the exact same country, in the exact same library, whatever it is, and select different data. And then we quickly walk up the ladder, which is, a mental process. And we get to a place where we pass our belief systems. And after we filter through our belief systems, we either do or say something. We take action. The tricky part is that once we establish beliefs, we hold on to those beliefs for a very, 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 very long time, right? Most of us have had our belief systems intact for a very long time. And again, if you remember the ladder of inference, those belief systems actually impact the data that we select in the future. All that to say is that once we have established beliefs about something, that we actually seek out data that confirms the belief system that we've already been holding. All of us. Right? So think about, your political affiliations, think about your relationships, think about somebody you think is just the best thing since sliced bread. You actually look for data that confirms how wonderful that person is, right? Over and over and over. So that's the tricky part. So one of the things that I tell people all the time is that it's very difficult to try to convince adults that your beliefs are wrong and they need to be changed. Instead, the more helpful way to approach it is by trying to walk people down their ladder or walk down somebody else's ladder by asking them to peel back some of the thinking that went into the belief system that they hold. If you hold a belief system that X is true, tell me a little bit about where that came from. What were some of the cultural lenses and or messages that you got that led you to that belief system? What are some of your own experiences around that, right? Where you're really facilitating someone kind of walking metaphorically down their ladder, down back closer to the selecting data rung. And then also, if you can insert new data for that person, then it helps them potentially start to rethink their belief system or expand potentially on their belief system. They may or may not ever totally change their belief system, but at least you're giving them access to data that is supplementing the current belief system that they already have. So, for example, I think a lot about how it is that certain movements in the diversity and inclusion community have matured over time. And I think I'm going to go back to the LGBT community here just for a moment, only because it's one that I think about often. It's because I think it's really an interesting kind of case study around diversity and inclusion. So, 40 years ago, we didn't want to know anything about people who identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered. At a cultural level, it was something that we just did not want to know. Now we have policy, we have gay marriage, we have gay pride parades, we have people who are openly transgendered. We live in a very different society in a relatively short period of time. I'm not saying 40 years isn't too long, but what I'm saying is that relatively short period of time, considering how change happens at a societal level. Right? And I think one of the things that happened there is that instead of just trying to change everyone's belief systems, what happened was there were a lot of people who came out all around the same time. Not to say it all happened right at the same time, but there were a lot of people who came out to their parents or to their siblings or to their bosses or to their friends. So all of a sudden, people who had belief systems about LGBTQ identity, all of a sudden had new data that was presented to them. New data like, oh my goodness, I know John, and John is a dear friend of mine, and John is a good person, and I love John. Therefore, the mental model that I have around people who identify as LGBTQ is broken, or at least there's a little chip in it now. And I think that that's the opportunity that we have around all sorts of issues related to diversity and inclusion. that we give people access to new data. And the way that you do that is by having personal relationships, right? You have personal relationships with people. It's really easy if you're never around young black folks to see gang violence on television or on movies and to be nervous the next time you see a young black man with his pants kind of drooping, right? But there's some opportunity if this person, has a relationship, they're in a mentoring relationship, they're working next to a person in their library who is a young black man, they are going to restaurants, or they're having people over, or their son has a good friend who's a young black man, and that person's sleeping over at their house and he becomes part of the family. Those sorts of things actually give people access to data that disconfirms the belief systems that they've had for a long time, and it starts to expand that belief system or change it. But I think that's the part that is really tricky, is to try to argue belief system to belief system just doesn't work very well. And that's part of what we see happening at even the political realms in our country right now, that we're trying to argue from the top of our ladders. Oyuki says, I think empathy is key to changing people's personal data. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And empathy comes from a relationship, right? It comes from, I am able to see this other person and value his or her experience. I care about it. And if you have a relationship that gives you access to another individual who comes from a different perspective or culture or belief system, that helps you to start building, a whole different kind of pattern of exploring data that leads you potentially to different belief systems and different actions. It's not easy work. The most important thing for us to do, I think, as allies, is to be patient, not just with ourselves, but with other people, and to let people be where they are. We don't have to change other people, and we also don't want to come across as having the right answer that we're going to force upon other people. But it absolutely is difficult. So Opal says, I'll refer back to the latter. It's just so frustrating when I get into heated discussions with family members, that I'm being brainwashed by social media. Yes. I agree, and I absolutely understand. And that's again where you're kind of arguing from the tops of your ladders. And I think that's the kind of contentious area that we live in, and why I'm proposing kind of the personal work associated with, I need to slow down and understand that we don't really convince people at the belief systems level. What typically happens is when we attack from a belief systems level, people just get more defensive, and the positions become hardened rather than more malleable. And so if you can get closer down to, this is where I'm coming from, this is what I care about, these are the values that I'm trying to align myself behaviorally and psychologically with, then that's coming from a different place where people may be able to feel less defensive about their belief system, right? Nobody wants to hear, you've been wrong all this time and I've been right all this time. It typically just doesn't work that there's a negotiation that can happen from there. But I absolutely feel you, Opal. I get frustrated too, but I don't feel like I actually am a change agent from that place. So some of the things that I'm going to encourage you to do, and in advance of this webinar, there was a document sent out that I prepared. It's just kind of a little packet for you to have as a takeaway to do some of your own reflection. Did all of you get that? The packet? Yes? Okay, good. So what the packet is meant to do is just give you some language. I love my definitions, right? But also some work that you might do individually and do some reflection so you yourself can think about opportunities for taking action. So on the Becoming an Ally page, where you reflect on, in what areas of your life do you have privilege and how do you know? Right? And so, Opal, when you said, white, older, privileged, then you might, those are areas of privilege for those people. But for you, in what areas do you have privilege, right? And so for me, for myself, I would say, well, I personally, Dieta, have privilege in that I'm straight. I am socioeconomically, I'm privileged, right? Educationally, from an educational point of view, I'm privileged, right? I do not have any disabilities. So, and I have certain areas where I have privilege, and I think it's important for us to understand where we have privilege, not to feel guilty about it, but because that's where there's opportunity for me to be an ally. I'm not ashamed of the areas that I have privilege. These are opportunities where I can actually be an ally. And so it's important for us to say, where do I have privilege, and then how can I use that privilege in order to be influential, right? And then the third question then is about what are some specific actions you might take? Are there specific things that you might do in order to be an ally? For me, early in my career, one of the things that I did was that I spent a lot of time working on policies to protect people from the LGBT community. I was the director of the Human Rights Office, and there was a lot of discrimination that was happening in the community in which I lived, a lot of discrimination. I lived near where Matthew Shepard was beaten and left to die in Wyoming. I actually lived in northern Colorado, but I was in that region. And so there was a lot of very serious hate crimes going on, and I wanted to find a way to really contribute to ending some of that discrimination, or at least making it much more demonstrable how our values come to life in this community. And so I wrote and then helped to pass legislation around protecting people from the LGBT community. Other areas, though, are that, I have specific privilege from a socioeconomic point of view. And so now I spend a lot of time doing work with different schools and school systems free of charge, where I just spend as much time as I can helping them build up diversity and inclusion infrastructure, where I go out and teach teachers, where I give lectures and speeches. I work on different committees in the school systems in order to try to make sure that people have as many resources as possible around how diversity and inclusion can be integrated into curriculum, how teachers can feel more comfortable talking with students, et cetera, et cetera. So those are some of the things that I personally do. And I encourage you to think about things that you can do, especially as librarians and educators and allies. What are some of the things that you can do that might be even part of your professional portfolio that would absolutely be appropriate, right? And then the other question here, the last question is, to what extent do you feel comfortable acting as an ally? This is an important question. When I first, and I'm going to go back to my LGBTQ only because it's a useful thread to hold on to here, but not because that's the only topic around which we can be allies. But when I first started as an ally, I was out there, trying to shape policy around, LGBTQ protection in housing and employment. And what happened was that I was on the front page of newspapers as a gay rights advocate, and people would say, Dieta Jones, lesbian, 25 years old, right? And I was outed even though I was a straight woman. And I had to realize that I was going to be associated with a cause as an ally. And at first, I have to tell you, at first I was like, ooh, how do I feel about this? Right? I was in my early 20s. I was like, wait, I'm not gay. What does that mean? How is it going to affect me if people think that I am? Are people going to get the wrong message? And then I realized that this is part of the work that I needed to do, part of my own work. But for all of you, the same thing might come up, that associating yourself as an ally with a particular cause or community means that there may be some consequences, not necessarily negative, but some consequences associated with that might have some impact on you. And it's important to just think that through. So the work that we have in front of us is all about, it's about me. I need to understand who I am and where I'm coming from. It's also about others, and it's about us, right? It's about us. And so continue on in the work, right? Continue on in the work associated with being culturally proficient and developing your own cultural proficiency. Continue to take action at a personal level, and also think about things that you can do organizationally speaking So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here on this one because we're just about up with time, and I know these will be available to you. But I want to make sure that you know that in your packet and you refer back to the personal level action plan. What are some things that you want to do and can do? What are some mindset adjustments that you might need to make? And this is an important one, right? And then at a professional level, what are some of the things that you want to do to take action? And I encourage you to spend some time reflecting on this and then going back to your organization and having a conversation with a colleague or two and talking about this some, and then maybe strategizing about how some of these ideas might play themselves out as far as the work that you're doing programmatically, from a coaching and development point of view, and as you're thinking about translating your values into institutional behaviors. Okay, that's it. That is us. We are just about out of time. Tell me, any comments, questions? Thank you so much, Opal. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, thank you. Ernestine, thank you. The slides will be available to you afterwards. You have the packet. Let me know if there's anything else, and I hope that we see you at Diversity Day in August. It will be wonderful to see you in person and spend time with you, and also hear some about the work that you've been doing, building upon or processing or sharing any of the ideas or resources that have come out of these webinars. And I want to thank you because it's been an honor for me to work with you over the course of these webinars, and I really look forward to seeing you in person. And thank you, Ayuki. Aaron, do you have any closing thoughts? Okay, maybe not. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. See you at Diversity Day.
And thank you, Dieta, for a wonderful webinar. We were very lucky to have been able to participate in this learning opportunity. Some great information and a sneak peek of what is coming up. Attendees, please be sure to sign up for the next webinar of Swiflin's DigiRef Academy, Resources for Genealogy, on July 7th. The next webinar of our STEAM initiative, the Music and Math of STEAM, on August 17th. And we, of course, want to see you to look ahead at August 24th, when Swiflin will be holding its first Yes for Diversity Day. Diversity Day will be a highly interactive day that will empower library staff and volunteers to reach out to diverse populations, increase skills of library staff in working effectively with diverse populations, and increase library programs and services to diverse communities in the local area. Be sure to register today. We also encourage you, as always, to look at the upcoming webinars and workshops in months ahead, and hope you're all able to join us for future training opportunities. As always, please feel free to keep checking the Swiflin Continuing Education calendar on our website, the Florida statewide calendar, our Facebook page, our tweets on Twitter, and also look for your message from the Florida Library listserv. Thank you and have a wonderful weekend.